Greetings and welcome to another lecture in comparative psychology. This particular lecture continues the talk on animal communication, what it is, how it works, what we use it for. Basically, what this lecture starts is what they use it for. For instance, communication can be used to solve problems. A lot of times the problems are things, that are fairly simple. I mean, they don't talk things out the way that we do, but it could be things like group foraging. We've already seen lots of information, videos and such about animals cooperating to a greater or lesser extent in terms of hunting, whether it's the bait balls, whether it's, wolves hunting or other wild dogs or other animals that work in packs. They all communicate when they're foraging, when they're hunting prey, when they're trying to figure out where food is. We also talked about how birds call when they find food. I mentioned this when I was talking about sort of the, if not the cooperation, but at least that birds will often call when they find food as long as there's enough food for everybody, right? And part of that is selfish herd, and part of that is looking out for predators, why it's more useful to forage in a group, that sort of thing. Some birds will take this a little way further. They'll take it a bit more. And one of the birds that tends to do that are birds called ravens. Ravens are basically, they look like very large crows. They're large black birds. They have very heavy beaks. They're very, very smart. And they also tend to work in groups. They tend to be in flocks. They tend to work together. For instance, when ravens will see a food source, they will give a particular call, which is called a yell. And what's interesting is that sometimes ravens yell just to bring others for food, and sometimes ravens yell so that they can bring others around to help them get food. Immature ravens have to take what's left over after the adults eat. But it's been shown that immature ravens, if an immature raven notices, say, a dead deer or roadkill or something with lots of adult ravens around, normally that immature raven would not be able to get in there and get to food, would not be able to get in there and eat. But if the immature raven gets enough of his pals around, they, by sheer force of numbers, can run the adults off and therefore get access to the food. So while adult ravens might yell, when they see a source of food, a patch of food, immature ones do it all the time, and they do it for a reason, because there is force in numbers. And if they get enough of the immature ones, then everyone gets to eat. Remember, we were talking about, this is an example of one of those communications where everybody benefits the more that there are. At least the immature ones do. The adults that get run off don't necessarily basically get anything from that, but hey. The other interesting thing is, when it comes to ravens, ravens, if one knows where a food source is, that food source may be able to last for quite a while depending on what finds it. Ravens can eat a lot, but if there's a dead deer or something big and dead, they could probably eat off that for quite a while, for days. And so if one raven knows where there's a big source of food, what will happen is they roost together overnight, and then in the morning, the other ravens will follow that raven that knows about the food. And they'll follow that raven to where the food is. We don't know how they do it. We don't know whether there's some sort of auditory communication. We don't know if the other ravens maybe can, like rats, can smell the food on that other raven. But they do somehow cooperate so that one raven can tell other ravens, here's food, you need to follow me. It really is kind of interesting when you look at this sort of communications to see what exactly might be going on. Because we don't, like I said, we don't know how they do it, but we know that they do it. We know that it's real. It's been tested enough times. So, how do they do it? Again, we're not sure. Also, dolphins, by the way, do something like this. When I was working with dolphins, we had a they knew a particular sign that was called creative, which basically meant they were supposed to do something new, something different. They were supposed to come up with something, and they could come up with some really bizarre things. What was interesting is when we would ask them, because they also knew a sign we called tandem, which basically meant do the same thing as the other dolphin in the tank. We want both of you to do this together, whether it's jump in tandem or do a somersault in tandem or whatever. When we told them to do creative in tandem, you go out, they'd swim together, and they would both do the same weird thing. It was weird. It wasn't something we had trained them. It wasn't something we'd asked them to do. But they would both do the same weird thing. And we have no idea how they told each other what weird thing they were going to do, and therefore that they needed to do it together. We don't know. Whether it was just simply that they could read each other's body language well enough that they knew that they would just copy what that other dolphin did, because we know they read body language very, very well. We really don't know how they did it, but we know they were communicating. And if they both did the same weird thing together, then they both got a whistle and they got food, which I guess counts for group foraging in a kind of a weird, bizarre way. Other animals communicate in different ways, depending on what's going on, depending on what kind of animal they are. Probably the most famous communicating animals when it comes to food are honeybees. Honeybees live together in very large groups. They go out, they disperse, if they find a source of food, and they come back with the pollen. What those bees will do is they will do a dance. They will just quite literally shake their booty, as it were, and do a particular dance. And the way they do it, the angle they do it, how long they do it, gives information to the other bees so they also can find the food. They don't have to follow that bee back, although some will do that. They can find the food on their own because the information includes, as I mentioned, where the food is in relation to the sun. So the bees look at the sun, perhaps in relation to the hive where it is. Also how far away it is. The longer the waggle, the farther away the food is. So I do recommend that you watch this video looking for the waggle dance. It really is just kind of fascinating to look and see how they're doing it, and to look and see how the other bees like clear a space. Sometimes they clear a space and watch them. It's like a challenge dance. And sometimes the bees will come in and will dance on top of everybody else, so that everybody presumably can see and also hear them. Because like the waggle part of the waggle dance, there's usually a buzz that goes along with it. It really is just fascinating to think that bees, they seem to be pre-programmed to do this, but that they can read those signals and know where to go to get food. Ants use something different. Ants use actual trails of pheromones. Bees, of course, can't do this because bees fly. But ants are walking, and as they walk, particularly as they walk with food, they will bop their abdomens against the ground and leave a trail of pheromones, so that when they get back to their nest, other ants can go and follow their trail back. And the trail might start out become very complicated, for instance, but as each of those ants goes back and bops its abdomen as well, the trail will eventually straighten out until it's about the fastest direct route between the ant nest and the food, and the other ants follow it. That's communication. It certainly isn't language, but it's communication. This is something also that people have known for quite a while. If you've ever had an ant infestation, you know that it's a really good thing not to just kill the ants, but also to make sure that you wipe off the areas where they've been walking to kill their trails so they can no longer follow the trail. I've actually done this in one of the more interesting student housing places that I lived, where there was an ant chemtrail we noticed, and so we got rid of the food and whatnot, and so I just basically rubbed off half the trail, and the ants would come marching one by one, and they would hit the end of that where I had rubbed the trail out, and instead of marching along very deliberately, they would just slow down and start just sort of wandering in circles because they'd lost the chemtrail. They didn't know where the food was without that chemtrail. So something to keep in mind, whenever you have ants, make sure that you get rid of the chemtrail because that is a way that they send information to others about where food is and allow others to also go get it.